Hello everyone, welcome back to 40K Fireside. It's your host Vik with you today, and I'm super excited to be doing this video. I have been working on this particular educational piece for quite a bit of time now, trying to refine it into a way that really captures only the most important pieces of information that I can pass on to you guys based on the experience I've had in competitive 40K to help improve your experience in 40K and help you consistently do a little bit better at the game. I've gone for a pretty catchy title. I've distilled as much of my knowledge as I can into 3 strategies, which are broken down into 3 more strategies, so really 9 different strategies, which I think across the time I've been playing Warhammer 40K have consistently been important to gain small incremental advantages which allow you to actually win any game, regardless of rule set, regardless of situation, regardless of your faction strength. These particular strategies are universal. They've been things which I have realized more and more over time can be developed, mastered, and actually have the biggest impact when they're all added together to actually doing well at the game of Warhammer 40K. Let's switch over to our presentation. I tried to find the best way to structure this, and I thought the best way would be to break it down into things that I learned during my time playing Warhammer. I've been playing for 10 years, and there are some things which kind of immediately came to the forefront when I started playing competitive 48, things which developed a little bit more when I was getting around the 3-year mark of playing. And then after that, it's where you pick up all the tiny little details, the instinctual understanding of the game at a deeper level. You see the same things over and over again, and you start to perfect and personalize it to your own particular taste, which happens as you start to become more of an expert at the game. This particular presentation, I would recommend, especially if you're, within the first 3 years of playing the game. And we have loads of people who are in that stage. We have some brilliant players who are coming into 40K, learning at a way quicker rate than I was learning the game. And I would probably recommend for anyone at that stage, make sure you probably write some notes down. The way this video is structured, I haven't put too much detail on the screen. I'm going to be using Tabletop Simulator to explain the strategies that I'm talking about, but writing down what I'm saying and breaking it down into individual points will help you review the knowledge, make it part of your journal, and also be able to reference back to it. If you're a little bit more experienced, you probably don't need to do that. You probably know a good chunk of what I'm saying, but even for those players, there are going to be 1 or 2 strategies or ways of thinking, philosophies to these strategies that I think is going to be really relevant and useful for you guys. At least I hope so. So let's get started with it. So the first overall topic I'm going to be talking about as a universal strategy that will help you win Warhammer 40K is pre-measuring. Now, pre-measuring is something that you will see people do as soon as they start playing competitive Warhammer 40K. And let me tell you, after playing a few other games, Age of Sigmar, Old World, that is not entirely a normal thing in gaming. Warhammer 40K players are inherently more competitive, more precise. We all push each other to use these strategies, which maybe seem like common sense, but actually can significantly improve your success of the game. Now, where I started with pre-measuring, and I think where a lot of people start, is being able to measure how far units move, how far units interact with you. And we particularly look at that in terms of a melee threat range, the maximum distance that melee units can reach you. Now, that concept is really simple, so I put it in the beginner section, but I want to use this chance to talk generally about how to play against melee armies. This is something historically I have always managed to do really nicely with getting the macro strategy for it. And I want to tie that in with our pre-measuring section here to give you guys a more logical way of working out how to deal with melee pressure, because that is a question, and probably the single question I get asked the most, because when you're at your beginner stages, it can feel quite overwhelming to deal with melee pressure. But let's try and break it down. Let's try and talk about pre-measuring and how we can use pre-measuring against any melee threats. So if we switch over to TTS, here I've taken a little selection of a few different melee units that I think will be relevant. So we've got the Victrix Honor Guard in the middle, which are a 6-inch moving infantry model unit, so they can go through walls and they have the ability to advance and charge, now I think up to 3 times a game. But let's say this is an advance and charging normal moving infantry unit. Then we've got a really fast jump pack unit, so something that moves 12 inches and in this case also advances and charges. We've got some Arco-Flagellants here, a unit which doesn't advance and charge in Hallowed Martyrs at least, but let's say that they're an 8-inch moving unit that has more consistency in its ability to make its charges because of the mechanic of the army. There are going to be different rule sets where you can automatically, say, make a dice into a 6 on your charge, like we had with Honor the Prince with Emperor's Children. In this case, we've got Miracle Dice, we've had Fate Dice, other dice fixing mechanisms. Again, another infantry unit that can move through walls with a slightly more consistent threat range. Then we've got our final type of unit, which is a melee unit that doesn't move through walls. Now, all of these units, so this is super beginner, but it's going to be relevant for some people. The strategy at a beginner level for pre-measuring is you take the position of a melee unit, you check its movement, its advance roll, add them together if they can advance and charge. So in this case, 18 inches is the movement, which will be your range here. I would always recommend pre-measuring the position that they can get to with their movement. And then you want to measure the charge distance, their maximum threat range from here, which goes all the way through to here. Cool. So this particular unit has that 30-inch threat range if it's staged up against here. Now, if we swap this unit for a unit of Victrix Honor Guard, this unit will move 6 with an advance of up to 6, and then charging up to 12 will be minus 6 inches on here, and will essentially take us to the corner of this ruin here. So their threat range, we're going to mark out over here. Now, don't worry, this is going to get a little bit more complex in a second, as well as me talking about how to protect against melee. So that's the threat range here. So this is our furthest threat range, and this is our least threat range in this example here out of the infantry-based units. The next concept to look at is just because this is the maximum pre-measuring threat range for these units, doesn't mean they always reach over here. The Sanguinary Guard don't always go their full 30 inches and attack something that's over in this area. There are different levels of threat that these units express onto the board. The area with the highest threat is the area where if they rolled any dice, they get the lowest value possible on it. And that is also an amount that I would mark on there. That's a guaranteed charge amount. And then depending on your tolerance, you can then tweak the pre-measuring of that to say what you're willing to accept the opponent connecting and what you're willing for them to reach within your army. Let me break that down for you a little bit better. So the Victrix Honor Guard over here, if they rolled a 1 on the advance and 2 1s on the charge, that would be a total of 3 inches, which means that the minimum distance that they would be able to reach you is 9 inches. That looks a whole lot less scary. In reality, there's an area around the midway point, which is a charge that most competitive players will try and take in the game. With a CP reroll, they'll probably go a little bit further and take the charge over in this area. This particular unit is very likely with a CP reroll to hit charges in this particular area of the board. Now, if you want to completely be out of their charge range, you would need to deploy all the way back here, which is your pre-measuring. You can be completely safe if you're behind this line. What I would recommend is if you focus too hard on that, which a lot of beginner players do, you'll find yourself placed too far back on the board. Instead, you should look at this area which they're likely to charge, decide that you won't put anything precious, anything that can do a lot of damage, things that you don't want tagged up, things that you don't want to die in the early staging parts of the game in this particular area. So anything squishy. Let's say you're really high damage output units that are really fast. They're going to go behind these ruins. They're going to stay out of the threat range of your opponent. The things which you don't mind your opponent charging, let's say a Wave Serpent or a Rhino, you're going to keep in this particular area and tell your opponent, if you want to walk into the threat range, you have to make a moderate charge to reach this unit, and if you're going to hit it, you're only going to attack something which I don't mind you hitting. So pre-measuring is finding the maximum threat range, the minimum threat range. If you're in this area, you will always get charged, seeing the probable threat range of a melee piece, and then playing your units at the furthest end of the probable threat range. So you want to be sitting in the middle of their threat range here with units you don't mind getting tagged. And then behind it, you want to put units that you don't want your opponent to engage with, and that forms your strategy for pre-measuring and protecting against melee. Now, the other type of melee unit which can express threat here is something like Thunderwolf Cavalry. Now, these units are a little bit easier to manage because their threat range is limited by walls. That gives you options to control the areas that they can move, and these should also be pre-measured. It's really easy to look at this particular unit and be like, okay, they can't go through a wall, they're not really going to get anywhere. But actually, in the current edition of the game that we're playing, this unit can move 21 inches guaranteed. If you imagine they move 10, followed by another 11, and then they have a minimum charge up to this point here. So even though in this case they're behind this unit and they can't go through walls, they actually have a better guaranteed threat range than the Victrix Honor Guard in this case. So just be a little bit wary about these units. Even if they can't go through the wall, you still need to understand what their maximum threat range is. This is where you ask your opponent, what is the maximum distance this unit can move? Let's mark it out and put a dice down on there. And then all you need is the movement, the charge. You get that bit yourself. Don't make your opponent say what the maximum threat range is. It always looks better if you get their maximum movement and then you express the threat range afterwards. And just think of kind of a little green area where they definitely charge, a slightly darker kind of area here, like a blue area here, and then a red area right at the end, which they're very unlikely to reach. That's the expression of their threat in color format. Much easier for you to express that if you're looking at the charge distance from their maximum move position. In order to deal with melee pressure, there are 3 particular units or types of units that you don't mind being on the front line in the high threat zone. These 3 units are things that are in transports, stuff that you don't mind if your opponent gets to, they destroy the transport. Really, they're killing a very cheap asset to then allow you the flexibility to get out of the transport and still activate with the juicy contents inside. The next one is going to be units that are able to take a punch from your opponent and still punch pretty hard back. Let's take, in this case, a unit of 10 Terminators. This could have a character who gives them a particular type of buff, like the current Space Wolves where they can get fight on death very easily. But even just 10 Terminators, Armor of Contempt, you get that on there and your opponent is not really likely, even with a very powerful melee unit, to get through all of this, and you'll still be able to punch them back. And that brings us on to the third one, which is if your opponent charges you, they also die. In this case, it can either be fight on death or units that fight first. Fight first is something that has been in the game as long as I remember, and a unit like Howling Banshees here could do a huge amount of damage to, let's say, the Sanguinary Guard here. In the current edition of the game, Eldar have very nice anti-melee capabilities. If a unit of Sanguinary Guard were able to engage with the Howling Banshees, in this case, I've got them with an Autarch who will be able to use a free stratagem to allow you to ignore modifiers. That turns off Armor of Contempt, and you'll find with 2-3 damage weapons, most of this unit will disappear before it gets to fight, and the Howling Banshees will win this particular engagement. That can mean that the Howling Banshees can sit on your front line, protecting all of the stuff behind, and your opponent's kind of stuck. Their melee threat range, even though theoretically it's very, very high, is actually stopped entirely by the unit that you've chosen to put at the front of the threat range. And that is our protecting against melee. Let's move on to the next section. Okay, so we've done point number 1, playing against melee. Let's move on to point number 2 of pre-measuring, slightly more advanced. At least for me, this took me a number of years to develop and realize just how important pre-measuring firing lanes are to being consistently good at Warhammer 40k. Nowadays, if you ever walk up to a table and you play against someone who is marking out some dice or putting a deployment zone marker across a firing lane, you immediately know you're playing against a good player who has developed a consistent, methodical way to gain that little bit of extra efficiency out of the positioning of their units, which can only be achieved by pre-measuring firing lanes. And what do I mean by pre-measuring firing lanes? I'm going to switch over to TTS to make this a little bit clearer for you. So on TTS over here, the 2 things that we want to pre-measure when we walk into any game. Ideally, you want to do this before the tournament starts. look at your terrain pieces. Using Tabletop Simulator makes this a lot easier, but you can also do it on the board or on your own physical boards. You want to have a little look at the firing lanes that can be achieved between pieces of terrain on the board. This is a GW terrain setup here, my favorite GW terrain setup, and what we want to do is look for firing lanes that look obvious through the board. So for example, in this case, there's a firing lane down that side of the board, there's a firing lane right down the middle of the board, and there's another one across the entire board from the position of that riptide in the corner. What we want to do is essentially grab something that draws a line, and we want to take a piece of terrain which is close to the opponent's side of the board and a piece of terrain which we want to deploy behind, so this piece of terrain over here, and we want to take whatever they can use to draw the widest firing angle behind your piece of terrain. If you can't quite get your head around that just by looking at it, just draw lines everywhere. So the way we draw the lines is we grab the corner of one terrain piece and the corner of our terrain piece, and we draw a line that connects the two of them. Now the theory is here, and across the 3 editions I've played, there's always been rules for some kind of obscuring like we have in 10th edition, is that no matter where the opponent is in this space over here, they will not be able to shoot anything that's behind this line, because the furthest that they can see is right up to this line. So if we wanted our heroic unit of rangers to be safe, we can grab them and put them right up here, turn their guns out of the way, and no matter where the opponent moves with this, with anything that goes into the middle of the board, they will not be able to shoot this unit of rangers. In order to shoot this unit of rangers, they will have to cross beyond this line and come over into this space. Now they may be able to do that, in which case, if we say that that is the maximum distance they can go, we'd shift the ranges a little bit so that they're out of that line of sight, or we accept that the opponent's going to move into that space. What you also do is, except for just drawing between terrain pieces, you measure the maximum movement of your opponent's shooting elements and consider if you're okay to be shot by them in that position. So in this case, we've got 2 riptides. This riptide was deployed over here and has moved 16 inches over into that space. This riptide has moved 16 inches over into this space. So we're saying Montcar riptides that rolled a 6 to advance or use their stratagem in this particular rule set. And we're going to draw the firing lanes for them for a unit that wants to deploy in this space. Now you can take the easy route, just put your units behind here, but look at the advantage that you can gain by spending a little bit more time analyzing and trying to draw out that extra 1% of efficiency, which is what you need to be more consistent in winning the game. These concepts are hard work when you initially start applying them, and they become easier as you make them more normal. So we're going to grab our riptide here, and in this case we're going to use the corner of this piece of terrain here, because that's probably the furthest distance they can go. We're going to draw a line over here, and then we're going to take the riptide over here. We're going to draw another line which intersects with the ruin that's just here, guys and girls. And that gives us 2 lines that intersect. Now, if you have a little look at it, if you are behind this line, so let's say our rangers were over here, they're going to be safe from this riptide, but they're going to be shot by this riptide. If you are behind this line, you're going to be safe from this riptide, but if you're in front of that line, you're going to be shot by the riptide on the other side of the board. So for example, if we put our ranger just here, you're going to be shot by both riptides. If you put the ranger here, you're only going to be shot by this riptide. If you put the ranger here, you're not getting shot by either riptide. And that will be the position that you would likely at this level place your entire ranger unit. And what this does is give you an extra 5 inches of movement, getting you closer a little bit to the middle of the board where you can engage with the game, but it also gives you more space to deploy behind here with other stuff that you want to keep safe, and helps you just deploy a little bit easier in general. So the ability to deploy right up against firing lanes is a massive advantage. Let's switch this around and look at it from the Tau player's point of view. If we grab our firing lane and redraw it over here, if it lets me. It's a bit thin, but it is there, guys. So we've got our firing lane over here, and this riptide, if you were not pre-measuring, you'd be like, okay, I want to keep the riptide safe. I'm going to put the riptide over here and just make sure it doesn't get shot by anything. But if you've pre-measured the line, what you can do is put the riptide right up against the line, And in this case, you would have gained an extra 5 inches, which is like rolling a 5 on your advance, improving the movement of the Riptide from 10 inches to 15 inches. That is a huge difference in your overall efficiency in the game. And that shows just how powerful, both offensively and defensively, deploying right up against the line is. I would always mark these kinds of firing lines out, guys. You know, you can buy some Fireside deployment markers and just use those to draw it out. You can use some dice and just draw out along this line just over here and just confirm with your opponent, look, I'm deploying behind the furthest line that your Riptide can get to, so that even if your Riptide rolls a 6 to advance, they won't be able to shoot the ranges. I'm also doing the same on the other side, so this unit of ranges can't be shot on either side of the board by the Riptides that you've deployed, and your opponent will be like, yep, I got it. They won't even try it. And, you know, you're playing a board game, so there is a chance, you know, this Riptide could move 16.5 inches if you haven't pre-measured it, and then you end up in an argument with your opponents. Just make sure you tell them what you're trying to do, you measure it as accurately as you can, play by intent so that you guys don't waste the limited amount of time you have to play the game. That is a good example of this, and this is one thing which I think has made a lot of the people who've jumped into the game recently, especially during COVID time, and used Tabletop Simulator a lot. They're really good at this particular thing, and it immediately gives you a big advantage. You can see a lot of those players doing very well in the game, because the way they look at the game is by drawing these firing lines in places and eking out the last little bits of efficiency they can get by deploying right up against the line. So that is point number 2. Okay, let's move on to the third part of section number 1, pre-measuring. And this one is quite an advanced technique that took me a long time to get my head around. I still haven't fully understood this concept. I've been trying to study Liam VSL, who I think is the true master at this. And the reason why he wins so many games is because his understanding of knowing when it's best to leave units hanging out in the open, to expose units, is so incredibly masterful. In order to achieve this particular thing correctly, you need to have a very good level of game knowledge. You need to understand what your opponent's army does, what your army does, the general maths of how your units interact with each other, and an instinctive feel of how the flow of the game might go as it progresses. Let's go on to TTS, and I'll try and explain this in a practical way and give some practical tips that I think might be able to come into play regardless of your player level here. So we've got back to a UKTC board. This is a Crucible board here, and I think this is a useful way of explaining this particular concept. Let's grab a Castigator here. Now, the general tendency for people is to place these shooting pieces really far back, use them quite defensively, see where the opponent can shoot them, like in our second part, and then essentially cut out the firing lanes, and if your opponent tries to move into the space, you then can attack them. Now, this is a common mistake that a lot of people make in the early bit of their competitive 40k journey, unless there's a reason for them to, and most of the time, especially in the early game, they're just going to go into this space over here, and they're going to tuck in, and this Castigator is going to be doing nothing for most of the game. Its movement pathways are incredibly predictable, and you can always stay behind this line, stay behind that line, just as we've been showing in the previous section. Easy to do. So what I would always recommend is, if you can do this in an intelligent way, look for opportunities for you to activate your units by placing them out in the open. Now in this case, of course, this Castigator can get shot right down this line, but by moving, let's say 10 inches, maybe if it's Bringers of Flame, it can move 16, or you've got the Triumph there, and it can move 12. This unit now has the ability to actively engage with the opponent down here. It can move up, shoot behind this ruin if the opponent goes in there, and this is something the opponent has to deal with in that position. Let's imagine that we have a Falcon. I know this is a wave swap, but imagine it's a Falcon, and it's over on this side of the board. Again, we're thinking not about rules, terrain sets, anything. In UKTC you can overhang, but just imagine you have the option of deploying over on this side with a very fast transport. Let's say this is a Emperor's Children Rhino or something. This can move over into this space and is able to engage with this side of the board really effectively, if you get the chance to attack, in a way that it wouldn't be able to if it was tucked right in behind this terrain. These are situations where it pays to be a little bit more aggressive and open with your units on the outside of the board. So
defensive mechanisms can also change the maths on how you expose your units. So first of all, we've got offensively, we want to be able to actually engage and activate on parts of the board in as few turns as possible. And the Falcon in this case and the Castigator are both able to do that when they're a little bit more exposed. The second is you can use defensive mechanisms. So for example, with Eldar, if they're shot, they can do a d6+1 move to get a little bit closer to your opponent, but also force your opponent to leave stuff hanging out or overcompensate to manage your defensive mechanism. The Castigator could pop smoke, get -1 to hit, get into cover even though it's in the open, and also use a miracle dice to pass a 6 on the save, and all of a sudden you're requiring a lot more resources to compensate for the potential for you being able to do that in this particular area of the board. So your opponent's going to have to put more stuff here and here to kill this than necessarily what that unit is worth. The next one is then covering your exposed units. So let's say you have a unit of broadsides over here. In this position, they can move and actually engage down here in a way that they would definitely not be able to if they were stuck back here or back here. Even if they were here, they're really only just shooting down that one firing lane. But over here, you're getting out and you're shooting and accessing multiple firing lanes, maybe getting behind ruins, and the ability to stage and then engage further up the board as well. And to maximize the benefit of you doing this, what you don't want to do is leave zero backup, the inability to punish your opponent if they do go for this unit. You want to leave them out in the open so they can activate. Your opponent jumps out, tries to kill them, and you want to be able to set up your faster units, something like a Riptide, to move into the space. So for example, if the opponent has a Castigator over on this side of the board, you just need to draw a firing lane to that. And that's the position you need to be, and you just pre-measure and make sure your movement allows you to access that part of the board. It'll probably even be done really aggressively from this area. Yeah, you can move over to there. You can put multiple Riptides doing the same thing, so you'll be able to double up, kill this area of the board, kill stuff that's in the middle of the board, making the proposition of dealing with what is quite a tanky unit a little bit worse. So this particular theory has 1 million different practical scenarios that you are trying to apply a very advanced, complex concept to. There will be certain things that you are naturally comfortable doing, and there'll be certain things which feel like this is absolutely wrong. This is a skill which develops as part of your instinct over time, where you realize, okay, in this particular matchup, me putting this unit here doesn't lose me the game and only improves my chance of winning the game. And there are going to be some times where putting the unit here is going to be immediately losing you the game. Let's say this is Val and her 3 Paragon Warsuits put right out in the open here. Sure, you can access stuff, but if that is your only true anti-tank in your army and you're playing against a vehicle heavy list and it immediately dies when you lose the turn and roll off, that's not the correct scenario to make this play, which is why I've put this on the expert level. But the reason I've even got this in this presentation is if you can develop the skill to know when to expose your units for your benefit, for the momentum benefit of the game, then you're going to have a much higher success rate in the higher levels of play when you're trying to win a tournament breakthrough from 4-1 to 5-0. This particular line of play, getting a Castigator to activate more, forcing your opponent to engage unfavorably, these are the things which can really bring you success. So that is the end of section 1. Make sure you review all of the information, have a little idea of how it maybe applies to game scenarios that you've noticed yourself, and then get ready because we're going to move on to section 2.
Right, let's move on to section 2, and in my opinion, I think this is the single most important strategy that you can learn in your time learning to be a better competitive Warhammer 40k player, and understanding and incorporating this concept into your play style, or at least the strategy that you're developing when you're playing. At least in my experience, I found that this made the biggest impact, and It's also the thing which is least understood by people. The name that I've given to this particular concept is called tempo, but you may hear other people call it momentum. The game spirals out of control. You get progressive advantages as the game goes on. You trade better. But essentially the theory is that your resources outweigh the opponent's resources across the entire game. That results in you winning overall as the game goes on. The way that I like to conceptualize this and teach this to people is considering some weighing scales, like you can see on the screen, and all of your weights are your resources, your units, weigh different amounts depending on how strong they are, and you keep them on the side of the board. Your opponent does the same. And as you put your weights onto the scale, which is making them active in the game, just trading and using them, your opponent can also do the same on their side, and whoever keeps the scale facing towards them gets the advantage in that stage of the game. Now, across 3 editions of playing Warhammer competitively, I have noticed a pattern with this, which I think is replicable and not really spoken about enough. Often, the strategy that at least I use to quite some success is to put some very low weights onto the scale. Your opponent puts some heavier weights than your weights onto their side of the scale. The game starts like that, and you have retained all of your heavy weights to then put on in the middle of the game. Your opponent then has a tougher challenge to outweigh your heavy weights, so they have to overcompensate. And then you can put your last little bit to tip you over the edge at the end of the game. That little middle bit is like a little tsunami wave that goes on, and you can try and fight it back a little bit. But at the end of the day, the wave is too large for you to stop with what you have. And that entire concept is called tempo. Starting with a little weak resource, moving on to using a strong amount of your army such that your opponent can't deal with it, and spilling over at the end of the game to win the game. This particular kind of pathway is incredibly successful. And what I found is that when players don't get the correct level of tempo through the game, then they're going to struggle against a player who has hit the correct tempo, and they just won't win consistently. This concept is something that I've been thinking about for a long time, and I think it's probably the single biggest secret to why some players do so well at the game of competitive 40k. Now, saying that, it is not always the same. The game has too many variables for tempo and tempo progression to be the exact same in every game. So there is still a little bit of finesse, skill, beyond just understanding the concept, to be able to apply it in different ways depending on the situation. I'll try and break down the key core concepts for you in this video, but we don't have hours and hours to do it here. So I'm going to try and give you all the information to then apply to your games and see if those concepts help you get through everything. I think a lot of players are going to have different comfortable ways of playing their tempo, but in my opinion, I've described the type of tempo that tends to work in most of the games that I play to quite a high degree of success. So let's move on to doing kind of a beginner, advanced, and expert level concept within tempo to try and break it down and get something that we can put on the board. Let's go. Okay, topic number 1 in this section is talking about something which I think most people work out very early on in their competitive 40k journey as being something that's very important, which is using the units that you have as efficiently as possible in order to maintain the amount of resources you have and work towards achieving the objectives you need to in order to win the game. This is a key concept in tempo, and something that people practice a lot. But what we're going to try and do here is break it down so that we always have a structured approach to what all of our units are doing, and we're not missing anything, which is the key thing. Every last little bit that we can eke out of our units or out of our resources as a whole is going to give us the most tempo, which allows us to win the game. So let's break it down into the 6 different things that a unit can do across every edition of Warhammer that I've played. And these 6 things are killing something, scoring objectives, scoring points, move blocking, screening, tagging things, and doing nothing. Doing nothing, we're going to change the phrasing on that, and we're going to call that staging. So our units will always be doing something. They're never going to be doing nothing. We're going to break down some of these concepts and see how they apply in-game and how we can use them as efficiently as possible. Let's start off First of all, with doing nothing and staging. So what we always want to be thinking, regardless of what we can do with some of our units, this unit is not going to do anything this turn, we always want to be looking one turn ahead what this unit could do the following turn, and ensuring we're staged forward in a correct position to do that. And you'll find pretty universally you can always edge forward or stage and defend a little bit further back from whatever position you were in the previous turn, because now the situation in the game has changed a little bit. So always be looking, just slightly adjusting, moving things forward, making sure they can activate in the next stage of the game. That is key for tempo. So number 6, even though it's in last place, is just as important as any of the other points. Let's switch over to TTS and have a little look at some of the other options we have and how we're going to do them as efficiently as possible. So on TTS here, we have a selection of different units in that bottom left corner. Simplest concept, we're going to start off first with scoring points. Now, we have a few different units here. This is an extremely cheap unit. This one is a slightly more expensive unit, but still very, very cheap. And then you have other units with special abilities, which are much more expensive, but can provide you efficiency in different kinds of ways. So point number 1 is using very, very cheap resources to achieve whatever you want to do. Instead of putting your really expensive combo unit over onto this objective in this corner, or tucking one model onto the objective over here, you're going to grab your unit of ranges or whatever cheap unit you have, and ensure that you're going to put just one model there, the rest of them out here. Use any defensive mechanisms to make it as difficult as possible for your opponent. So just this on its own is likely to mean that your opponent is going to come over here, kill this unit, take this objective off you, or put another unit on here to try and be on the objective. If you can do this, apply pressure onto whatever the primary objective, which we say primary objectives for anything involving holding objectives, while also scoring whatever your secondary objectives are. Across every edition, you often have to play into the middle of the board or into areas of the board to score additional points. If you can do those kinds of things with a unit that's very, very cheap, it forces your opponent to interact in a very interesting way, where often they have to use a more expensive unit to ensure that they kill this entire unit, or they put a unit exposed on here to ensure that, they take this objective off you. At that point, they have traded something for your something. Interestingly, some of your units will have defensive abilities which make this even more interesting. The ranges in this case have a reactive move where they can tuck back behind the wall, and if your opponent did put one model over here, sure, they take the objective, but your unit may not die unless the opponent uses another unit to come over here. This is what I talk about, putting the light resources on your side of the scale. If they have special abilities, they make your opponent lose so much tempo in the early game because they have to overcommit to these kinds of things. Other ways of doing it and other mechanisms which are really interesting are things like Celestine. Celestine has always been able to get back up the first time she dies. So if Celestine's over here, and in this edition she's got the ability to heal her Gemini Superior, which can jump back onto the objective when they heal, or she can go with the whole unit on here, and if your opponent kills everything, then Celestine can get back up and you will still be on this objective over here. So using resources with defensive mechanisms can improve their efficiency even if the points cost of the unit is not necessarily the most efficient thing. The next thing is units that can achieve multiple of our 6 categories in one go. So the active categories are the first 5: killing something, screening, move blocking, scoring, and tagging things. So this warp spider unit can easily do 4 of these things. So the warp spiders could go over onto this side of the board, spread out, and in this case, they may be scoring points in the middle. They'll be move blocking an area of the board so the opponent can't walk through it. They'll also be shooting with their flamers and killing something, doing damage. They may be, in this edition, they'll be setting up Overwatch and shooting something else, again, doing more damage. They'll also be screening sections of the board from opponents' deep striking. Deep striking has always been a concept in 40k, so they'll be pushing the deep strike back. You may have used a more expensive unit than your unit of ranges to achieve the point scoring thing, but you've done
4 different jobs with one unit, even though this unit is almost double the cost. If you want to also incorporate something with even more expensive premium units, you can look at stuff like a Riptide or a Winged Demon Prince from Emperor's Children. Now, the Emperor's Children Winged Demon Prince is really, really expensive, but if you can move a huge amount over to this side of the board and then charge into something, do some mortal wounds, kill that, then consolidate onto something else, then you punch it and kill it, then you move over here and tag something, then what this unit could have done is it's screening an area of the board. It's also killing a bunch of things. Maybe it's scoring objective points on this objective over here, or reducing your opponent's scoring. And it's also tagging stuff. So tagging stuff is really, really powerful. In a lot of editions of the game, you are unable to fall back and do things either at all or as effectively as if you were free and not in melee combat. So yeah, really, really powerful combination of different things that you can do here. And that concept, all put together, is our idea of using our resources, either the cheapest resource or the most efficient resource, to achieve as many things as possible. This concept mainly applies in the early game, but it's going to apply all the way through the game. This is a fairly skillful thing, but I put it in beginner because it's one of the first concepts that everyone tries to work out, both in their list building and also when they're practicing their games. It's also one of the things which people get wrong the most. In situations where they could have creatively used one unit to do 4 things out of their 6, they used one more expensive unit and did 1, or they used 3 or 4 units to achieve 3 things that one slightly more expensive unit could have achieved all 3 considerably more efficiently. And the more of these situations you can create in the early game, the better your tempo is going to be as the game goes on. Okay, topic number 2 is kind of a follow-up of topic number 1, taking a lot of concepts from the entire previous section of pre-measuring and bring them together to apply them directly to getting as much tempo as you can. This is a key part of creating tempo and one of the cleverest things that you can do to try and get an advantage on your opponent. Now, forcing unfavorable engagements can be done in quite a few different ways, but essentially the concept is that you are putting something out in front of your opponent that your opponent has to engage with in a way that makes them lose way more resources than you've lost. Either on a point-by-point basis, which is something that I think, can lock you in a particular box, which it's actually a much more creative solution than just point-by-point. What you want to do, and I'm going to break this down into 3 different ways. Way number 1 is using something that's really cheap and making your opponent use something that's quite a bit more important or expensive to come and kill that unit, and then you can easily pick them up. Point number 2 of this is to do this in a way where your follow-up attack on them can be more safe and less exposed than it would have been if you were stretching out towards them to kill them. And point number 3 is identifying the parts of the opponent's army that they desperately need to use to deal with certain resources in your army and trying to get those into unfavorable engagements. Better than the opponent can do that to you. All 3 of these things will create tempo. Let's go on to TTS and have a little look and see if we can show some examples of those things. So, point number 1 is quite straightforward. Let's say we use our unit of 3 Arcoflagellants and we're going to chuck them onto this objective over here, and we're going to put 1 model on, hide his tentacles, and we're going to go really tight there. If the opponent wants to shoot them with their pre-measuring, they need to move into this area with a shooting unit. If they want to charge them, they need to charge over into this area. Almost definitely, anything the opponent uses to kill these 3 Arcoflagellants is going to be worth more than the Arcoflagellants in points and the relative value in the army. It's always worth diving onto these objectives with cheap resources that you have put into your list for this particular purpose to gain tempo, because tempo is the single most important way to consistently win Warhammer 40k games. The second part of this is ensuring that you have the correct follow-up afterwards that can then attack the opponent in a much more safe position. So let's say, I don't really have many other sisters units, but let's say we're going to be using Celestine over here, and Celestine, instead of being on the objective where the Arcoflagellants are, is going to be our follow-up here. So Celestine's going to go, and whatever goes and kills this unit, let's say in melee, ends up over here. Your opponent's trying to be as efficient as possible. They haven't used anything too big. You're going to dive over, kill that unit, and tuck back in with your pile-ins into the position where the Arcoflagellants were as best as you can. Now with a unit with a defensive modifier like we talked in topic 1, this unit requires even more resources for the opponent to kill, and maybe they'll be able to take the objective off you without even killing this unit. Another good example of this, one which I think is really relevant to the game at the moment, armies like Black Templars, Emperor's Children, and armies which use combination units that hit super hard. They have these hammer units that go in and they're able to kill any target they go to. They will kill your premium unit as well as your cheapest unit. And a very powerful way of dealing with these is if they, for example, have a little Rhino with one of these crazy units of Noise Marines or Infractors with a character, and you just put your Arcoflagellants over here and you're tucked in behind the wall. What is your opponent's choices? They need to move into a very exposed area with one of their units, all of which are at least 4 times as expensive and certainly a lot more valuable than your Arcoflagellants. So your opponent is going to end up exposing in this area with some important resources. So it's important that you have the follow-up here. So you're going to make sure you've got a Castigator looking right down this line. Wherever the opponent goes, you're going to be able to follow up with damage. Celestine's there, maybe you've got some Retributors, or whatever the example is for your particular army. But that is the way of creating unfavorable engagements for the opponent. And the important thing to note is your opponent has attacked you in this area. Relative to their side of the board, it's beyond the halfway point. You are playing with resources that are tucked in right by your deployment zone. Very defensive, safer positions. You have the favorable engagement, which ends up giving you good tempo. The other particular concept in this is trying to work out what the opponent has that can deal with certain resources in your army. So let's say, for example, you have a unit of Howling Banshees, but you only have 1 unit of Howling Banshees in your army. And now you need to use this unit as best as you can to try and manage the opponent's resources really well. But if you are in the opponent's side of the board, you have to think about how you can create an unfavorable engagement for these Howling Banshees, because if you can go in and kill this unit, they have no defense from fights first. The value of this unit is really, really high, much higher than their points cost. So creating an unfavorable situation for them is very important. Let's be the Emperor's Children player and swap this over. So if they have their Howling Banshees staged up in an area over here on the board, what you can do that's very interesting is set up so that you are maybe shooting, grenading, something like that on these Howling Banshees and applying that as a threat. So rather than diving in with your Infractor unit and going for something back here, you're setting up, staging, and you are going to threaten the idea that you're going to peek around this corner and kill these Howling Banshees. You're going to play a little bit slower to try and grab tempo as the game goes on and not give your opponent the advantage, because as soon as this unit disappears, the Eldar army will collapse afterwards. That example can be applied across multiple things. If your opponent, in this case the Sisters player, let's say, has just 1 unit of Retributors and you're a Tau army with loads of Riptides, then what you're going to try and do is encourage these Retributors to come out and kill 1 Riptide in an isolated situation where you have follow-up and your opponent is not able to push in and kill all of your units or multiple of your units. They've traded for this 1 Riptide with the only resource that can easily do it in that position, and then you kill the Retributors, then you have free reign to move with everything else. You have encouraged your opponent into an unfavorable engagement in order to get tempo advantage. And that concept, very, very powerful. Let's move on to the last. Okay, topic number 3. And this I've put in the expert level. It takes a long time to get this down to a true art because there is too much maths hammer to do to know exactly what full sending your army into your opponent's army is going to do for sure. So you need to develop a lot of feel to get the idea of what's too much pressure that your opponent can't handle it, and how much do I have to leave back in the tank to carry me out through the end of the game. What is the risk level of the play that I'm making? If it all goes wrong, have I just lost? Is the odds of that so low, and there's so many backups that it should be fine. A lot of these things take a huge amount of time, and it's a topic that I've been talking a lot about at the moment because the current types of Aeldari armies, which is my specialty faction, at the moment really require a highly aggressive type of mid-game play in order to consistently win their games. And at the Fireside, we have dubbed this the concept called "Don't Be a Coward." And I think that helps. There will be little doubts of, should I do this? Should I carry on playing a little itsy bitsy game all the way through? And what you'll find with a lot of armies, not just Aeldari, playing the little itsy bitsy control game has progressively become less and less popular over time, as that concept about tempo, sending in a little bit and then overwhelming in the middle of the game and finishing out with what's left because you have a little bit more than your opponent, is something which has become more and more effective and more commonly used as the game has kind of developed. So I'm going to try and break down this concept into practically applicable ways by using our tabletop simulator. So I've done a little setup here of Emperor's Children versus Aeldari, which is a common matchup that you'll see, but also exemplifies this particular concept very, very well. Now, let's look at it from the Aeldari point of view. We can also look at it from the Emperor's Children point of view, and it's exactly the same. So whoever has the active turn here has a little decision to make. We've got to the stage of the game where there's been a little bit of skirmishing. Maybe there's a little unit of Corsairs or Rangers just hiding over on this side of the board. The opponent, the Emperor's Children player, has a Lord Cacophonus, which is just tucked in back here. Maybe Lucius is tucked in back there. You've got some Infractors or Tormentors over on this side of the board as well. And this is the board state. You've done a little bit of skirmishing, and maybe the first unit of Corsairs has died. The opponent has, traded one of their kind of combo melee units into there, one of their expensive melee units, and the Eldar player's gotten a little bit of tempo here. They've still managed to retain their fight first. Now, the Eldar player has a choice here. They could play very passively and just, for example, use some warp spiders, try and move block this part of the board, something like that, put them all 2 inches apart from each other, which, will work a little bit, but really Emperor's Children are so fast they're going to get around here. A lot of melee armies are really fast. They're going to get around and into these spaces. So these are the situations where if the Eldar player has gotten a little bit of tempo in the early game by doing the previous 2 sections, they've used cheap resources to achieve what they need to, they forced an unfavorable engagement and gained a little bit of an advantage in points resources, but also in momentum because it's now their active turn. They move back onto this objective. They could repeat it for one more turn, but the Emperor's Children player is staged pretty far forward. So now we have the option where we decide, okay, I'm going to try and kill some of the opponent's resources. Mid-game tempo, it works very well the more of the opponent you can kill if your army is able to do that. Now, if your army is really, really fast, they can do it from this position, which is right on your DZ. Aeldari can do that. If your army isn't very fast, they can do it from staging positions further up the board. All armies can activate from these kinds of positions. It just affects which turn you can do the activation. So in this case, we've got Aeldari, super, super fast. You can send a Falcon in. You can send Lycus in. You can send the Wave Serpent over to here, and the Fire Dragons get out over here. You can send in 10 Swooping Hawks who can advance over to this side of the board, and they are going to create a big move block over here. Ignore that, that was meant to be over here. And inside there, we've got Dark Reapers, Morgan Ra. And then you're going to make a choice here. Do I want to leave anything in the bank? You're going to go, okay, I'm going to leave 5 Swooping Hawks over here so that they can move on to this objective as a follow-up and they can screen a little bit. But I'm going to carry on sending any unit that can do a lot of damage. So the Howling Banshees are going in as well. Warp Spiders are going in as well. And what you're going to do is try and kill as much of this as you can. And you're going to end up killing a lot. The Fire Dragons are going to be able to kill a Demon Prince plus at least 1 Rhino. They may even split fire a little bit and manage to kill the other Rhino. The Swooping Hawks are going to be doing their mortal wounds. Morgan Ra is going to be doing dev wounds as well. You're then going to be able to shoot with the squishy stuff inside of the Rhinos and charge here. And you could easily end up killing 1,000 points of the opponent's army. Now, your army is very, very fragile. So in this situation, you're going to end up losing a lot of your army here. But mid-game tempo, you've created your tsunami. Your opponent is able to calm you down a little bit, but you're still going to have little scraps here. You're going to have a few Phoenix Lords here. You may have some of these transports still alive, and these little bits are going to push into the opponent in this part of the board, and you're going to gain your momentum advantage, which is going to carry you through the end of the game. And the reason why you were able to do that was because you went in very aggressively in this mid-game turn. So when the opportunity is correct for you to do this, which is a skill which you're going to have to learn over time, but it comes up it comes up more often than you think. Our natural tendency is to be a little bit of a coward in these situations, when the correct move is actually don't be a coward, because if the Emperor's Children player is able to build up their buffs, able to pick away at you, at some point they're going to be able to do what you set up to do here and send in multiple units all over the place. And you're going to find you don't have enough of an Eldar army to actually kill everything in their army. And by the time you do get through it, you're fighting in this part of the board rather than this part of the board, and they've been sitting on some objectives with their Rhinos behind you. So key thing here, don't be a coward. Try and maintain pressure if you've managed to gain your tempo advantage in the early game, which you will, because you've watched this video and you're going to try and absorb and practically apply the concepts that have been discussed here. That is our section on tempo. Okay, section number 3. This is our final section, and thank you all for sticking around this far into the video. If you're still here, that hopefully means that you're enjoying this video and finding it very, very useful. And if you are, I would love it if you could subscribe to the channel, stay up to date with everything. But also, if you wanted more content just like this, we have a lot on the membership side. Join YouTube membership, and there's a lot of content from Dave and I, which is very similar to this, so you're bound to find something else useful. This is also all extremely macro strategy, core overarching concepts. If you want more detail, you want 4 hours of Liam VSL just talking about the combat phase, you want Dave just talking about early game theory, if you want me just talking about Aeldari tactics and strategy for 4 hours, check out 40kfireside.com for our masterclasses. Those have been really, really popular and very useful. Finally, if you want to discuss anything, ask questions on your YouTube membership, join at the Phoenix Lord level, which is the Discord level, and you'll be able to discuss everything. It's a really active, friendly community. It's gotten pretty big now, so there's a lot of content to digest in there. Definitely check that out. In terms of our third section, now there was a lot of things competing for this section. And I decided to go for screening because screening is a core concept that has been important in every edition of Warhammer 40k, but progressively with each edition, deep striking, strat reserves, all of these things have been expanding. We didn't have strategic reserves before, now we do. We didn't have rapid ingress, now we do. We didn't have anything less than a 9-inch deep strike, now we've got 6-inch deep strikes. So the importance of screening has significantly increased. This concept is much more simple than the last two. It's a lot less abstract, much more logical, and technical skills can be applied to this one and developed really easily.
The expert section of this is going to be the most interesting one, because that's where I talk about some of the more abstract things that can help you win games, and areas which I think a lot of people fall foul of when they're trying to do their screening correctly, that ends up losing them the game rather than winning them the game. It uses a combination of discussing how we can maintain tempo while also using our pre-measuring to ensure we're getting the optimal effort out of all of our units. So let's move on to the first section, which is going to be more of the kind of core concepts here. We want to get the basics down so that we can build up to that expert level. Number one is blocking deep strikes. Let's jump over onto TTS. And in this example, we've got a cheap Eldar unit, this unit of Rangers, versus a unit of Noise Marines. One of the main ways that we use screening is that we often want to screen out our deployment zone or behind our army. The technical skill of doing that is to take your 9-inch deep strike area, which is where usually the range at which enemy units can't enter into the battlefield, and then you want to add in the base size of the enemy unit involved. Now, if it's a single file unit or a single model, you want to use a single base here, and this is a 40mm base, but I always play a little bit on the safe side, so I usually pretend that this is 1 inch of base size. The reason we do that is that if you only leave 1 inch of space, the back of this model will be sticking out at the edge here, and they won't be able to place their model in. To show that a little bit clearer, on TTS we can add 9-inch bubbles here. We're going to go 9 inches, and 9 inches would put us right here, but we want to eke out every last bit of this. So we're going to move this forward 1 inch, and we're going to put that right there. So that is from the back of the base, that should be 10 inches right to the edge of the board. The Noise Marines won't be able to enter into this space. You'll need to continue the line across here with the rest of the unit. Your front of your base is the maximum forward position you're able to get in, and like we were talking in our pre-measuring, in our tempo, you want units staged as far forward, as active as possible to be able to make the best use out of them, so eking out all these last little bits of movement does help. If the deep strike range of the enemy unit changes and it goes to 6 inches, you just apply the same theory, but you just go back a little bit here to make sure your 6 inches works. Perfect, and this should be 7 inches from the back of the board, so 6-inch deep striking would not be able to get in there. This particular way of doing it is the main way that you stop enemy units from coming in behind you. Now, if you look at your board, that is the main thing that people want to stop happening. The other thing is, sometimes you want to stop the enemy from deep striking in front of you. So concept number 2 in this is stopping something from deep striking in such a way that it can shoot you. Now, if we have a little look at this unit of Rangers over here, what I've done is placed this unit of Rangers in a position where if we draw a 9-inch circle around the Rangers, and then a line of sight on the best possible angle to the Rangers, and you look on the board edge, the actual position that it can be shot at is not possible unless the opponent goes within 9 inches. They would have to be over here. So that means that these Rangers, without anything else screening forward here, is able to stop an enemy unit from coming over here, your Noise Marines coming out of Strat Reserves, and shooting into the Rangers. Just to talk about tempo on that, you can already see the impact that this situation would have on your tempo. Very cheap unit, blocked out deep strike. You haven't given up anything else, and you've been able to kind of control this area of the board, both blocking deep strikes in the corner, but also in front of you with just one unit. That is phenomenal efficiency of the way you use units, and it's the way you're going to get more tempo. Finding little things like this and playing around with it on Tabletop Simulator will significantly improve your success in your games. The next thing is managing things like rapid ingress. So rapid ingress is a new concept in 10th edition where enemy units can come in at the end of your movement phase for a command point. That can significantly change the threat range, and it can also force you to have to block out deep strikes much more aggressively. So in this case, we may need to use another unit, let's say a unit of Warp Spiders tucked in over here, to help block this out, or another unit of Rangers. And ideally what you want to do is the unit which is in the less safe position here, pretend this is a Warp Spider. This measured approximately 10 inches to the edge.
Awesome. So there's no model which is going to be able to fit in over here. Cool. So you can see here, this position to block out the rapid ingress from reaching your unit needs to be done kind of like this. So if the enemy rapid ingress is over here, you want this space to be further than the movement. So in this case, let's assume it's a 6-inch moving unit from where they can shoot the ranges over here, and you're sacrificing this unit over here, maintaining your primary. So these are situations where you would use a second unit to push back the rapid ingress. All you do is add the movement speed of the rapid ingress unit and keep it away from your pre-measured lines over here in order to gain your tempo to win the game. Nice. That's good. We're tying everything together here. So that's the three concepts. Protect your backfield, protect forward positions where enemy units can come and engage with you, and then keep a little eye on rapid ingress threats. Now, you can see from this concept, just to go back to tempo a little bit again, that having stuff in Deepstrike forces your opponent to put stuff further forward for you to engage with, just because there is the threat of you doing rapid ingress and deep strikes. So that's also a very powerful way of creating unfavorable situations and gaining tempo. So I always recommend trying to keep something in reserves if you can, just to keep your opponent on their toes. Perfect. So let's switch back here. Brilliant. And we'll move on to the next section. Okay, let's move on to part 2 of screening. A little bit more advanced, we're going to be talking about move blocking. Move blocking is well understood, really common concept. You'll hear people say it all the time, but we're going to want to, now that we're further into our training here, we're going to want to incorporate our pre-measuring correctly, our tempo here correctly, and try and do the 3 different types of move blocking in the correct kind of way to get the maximum effectiveness out of it. Move blocking is one of those things a lot of people get wrong, but let's try and break down the ways that we would definitely move block. So let's switch over to Tabletop Simulator, and in this case we are going to use the example of an Emperor's Children Rhino. We've got our Emperor's Children Rhino staged over here, and the 3 different types of move blocks. The first one is going to be where we physically block the path that an enemy unit can move through and stop them from engaging in a space that we want to keep safe. So in this particular situation, we've got our 5 ranges on the objective, like in the previous example, and we want to stop the unit that's inside of here reaching this unit. In order to do that, we're going to take a move blocking unit, in this case our unit of warp spiders. We're going to use this as efficiently as possible, so we're going to try, if we can, to get a kill on something, block out some deep strikes, see if we can score some points as well while we're there. And we're going to put this unit and this position. Now, the models that come in, we're going to do the same pre-measuring we did on blocking deep strikes, which is we're going to assume the base size is 1 inch, and then we're going to keep another inch from it to prevent the enemy unit from moving through. So the furthest we need to be with our warp spiders is here, and we're going to put one right there, more than 1 inch away from the rhino. And now we're going to make 2 inches of space and just basically daisy chain our warp spiders all the way around. This works perfectly fine on a unit that moves on foot as well. So in this case, the enemy unit will have to disembark over on this side, and then they'll have to move around these models in order to get through. If you want to make this work really nicely against units that are on foot, I prefer not to wrap, and I prefer to make a straight line at that point of your move block. You could also position this on this side of the board, which gives you a more defensive position if they decide to shoot you. And then if you have any defensive rules like a reactive move, you might be able to get yourself to safety. So that is move blocking number 1, a physical move block of the path that any unit wants to walk. The second one is going to be controlling the final position that an enemy unit can end up in. Now, this can be done in a few ways. The most common one that we tend to see is staying off the edge of a wall and not leaving enough space for the enemy unit's base to enter into here. You often hear people say with their intent, they want to be 1 inch off the wall.
And the reason they're doing that is if you're an inch off the wall, they can't get engagement range from this side of the wall, but there isn't quite enough space for them to fit their model on this side of the wall as well, which means that they can't be charged unless they're charged from the side. It also can be used to control the firing angles of enemy units. Let's say that our warp spiders are over here, and we want to try and keep them safe. Now, there's an angle to fire into the warp spiders over here. And the enemy unit is a unit that can't be physically move blocked on its path because it flies. Let's say this Riptide. Now this Riptide moves 10 inches, which is theoretically enough for it to reach that line. So the second move block is going to be preventing that final position of the Riptide from reaching there and landing on that space. Now you always want to be efficient, and you want this unit to try and do as many things as it can. So it's going to try and get a little firing angle down here if it can, something like that. Also, it's very effective against big models that want to try and get nice big firing lines. This model has a huge base, and if you measure the back of the base with its amount of movement here, this model can just about get over to this side of the wall. So all you need to do is put one model here, and you can be an inch away there. Perfect. And you're able to stop that unit from landing in any part of this space. Perfect. The third type of move block is controlling what your opponent can engage into, which is what we talked about in controlling melee without pre-measure. And that's leaving something which is less valuable on the front line and then making sure that that blocks the opponent from reaching our more precious resources, which are more than 4 inches away. And that is a nice, simple overview of how to do the different types of move blocks. Okay, and part 3 of this section is the most important part. This is the bit that people get really wrong and actually find that screening and move blocking drags so much tempo and resources out of their army that they're not able to make it to the end of the game with enough stuff because they've been too aggressive with their screening and move blocking. So actually, the expert level of this, the bit that really ties everything together, is being able to know when you actually don't need to screen, when you don't need to move block, when you don't need to waste resources. We've already talked about this a little bit in terms of achieving the most that we can with as few resources, but there are also a couple of situations where we really don't need to dive in and screen or move block the opponent. And let's run through those on TTS. So we've got Tabletop Simulator here. Let's take situation number 1, which is for screening. So for screening, one of the most common things that go into reserves are these really powerful hammer units. You might have Val and 3 Paragon Warsuits. You might have a unit of 6 Inceptors which come down. You might have something like a big brick of Noise Marines, or you might have a unit of 6 Thunderwolf Cavalry that come down, or a unit of 10 Terminators. Now, it's worth noting that there are some areas which are going to be really premium for these Terminators or whatever unit to come down, do high amounts of damage, clear sections of the board, and hold the board. And there are also going to be much less valuable parts of the board for them to exist. For example, if these 10 Terminators were to exist over here, they rapid ingress, move over here, charge, and hold this entire space here, which if you want to see a game where exactly this happens, you can check out the finals of the Coventry 2-day stream on the UKTC TV, where I played against Matthew, who played brilliantly and managed to make this exact play into some ranges over here, killed these ranges, existed on this objective for the whole game. Mistake on my part, because this is actually the premium position these Terminators could end up. There are areas of the board which are far less important for the opponent to exist in. So if these Terminators were screened out from this section of the board, let's say my Warp Spiders have been thrown in here to do some move blocking, and the Terminators were pushed all the way back for their rapid ingress. In that case, the areas of the board they're looking at are over here. And realistically, this part of the board is a part of the board that they can easily control. It's their expansion objective. And if they want to come in and attack over here, actually, it's really easy for you to screen that back and push them out. They come in and they end up basically inside your army. And at this point, it's really easy to kill them compared to if they're hiding behind here and inside of here. So you don't mind if the opponent's premium units deep strike into areas of the board where you can easily engage, kill them, or they're actually killing very few resources. For example, imagine that this unit of rangers was actually screening this part of the board, and the opponent decided they're going to put their 10 Terminators or Val or whatever over into this area. They move forward, kill the 5 rangers, and exist over here. What I've basically got is probably one of the best units in their army. Having traded for a single unit of rangers, I've created an unfavorable trade. I've used the minimum possible resources to achieve it. I've already pre-measured to ensure that they can't then tag into other parts of my army. And then, boom, I get a massive swing in tempo because I'm able to clear these 10 Terminators out without actually exposing my units or having to really overreach to get them, possibly not killing them, because I am definitely killing them in this position. That is position number 1. Now, number 2 is the move blocking side of things. The way I always like to look at it is with units that are on the board, they always express their threat range as a circle around them. And like we mentioned with the pre-measuring, there are a lot of times that these melee units are only able to stage, but not able to actually engage with your army. And there are other times where they're not even able to move further forward to stage, and they're not able to engage with your army. In situations where this unit's threat range starts to become a bit cold in the area where your army is, they're not an active threat for the next turn. If they're also in their best possible staging position, like these Thunderwolf cavalry over here, then do you really need to run in and move block them? Not necessarily. So in this case, you could just leave those Thunderwolf cavalry free to do what they want to do, because actually you're not leaving anything easily for them to be able to charge with it. So that's one situation. And then if they are able to move into a better position to stage, so for example, let's take 10 Arcoflagellants, and they're over here. If these Arcoflagellants are able to run in and stage a lot better if they get into this area, it may be worth doing a move block in this area. But again, remember that this unit moves into this space, and instead of you actively move blocking the path that they go into, you can set up your second layer of threat in this area for the position that you know they're going to move into. So at that point, what you end up doing is actually killing the unit and maybe trading one of your units for it or a couple of your units into this position and actively scoring points, etc., rather than really overextending and trying to screen out the opponent. Those are the two biggest mistakes that I see people make. They often screen in those two situations when they really don't need to. Screening and move blocking are very, very powerful. Knowing when you don't have to screen and move block, that's a game-winning strategy. That is knowing when to screen. And let me move myself over to here. This is something I've really wanted to make for a long time, and I hope you guys have all enjoyed this. Now, if you leave a comment below with a question that you have, if you're seeing this on Reddit and you have questions, just comment with them. I'll try and look through, answer as many as I can. It's a lot easier if you join the Discord and tag me on the Discord and ask your question. I'm very happy to discuss any of these topics, and I'm pretty sure there's going to be a lot of discussion on a lot of these topics. If you watch this video again, take your notes, review everything, just see how especially the advanced and expert level techniques apply to your game. Try to master those and you'll find that the macro strategy you have will be much, much cleaner. It's taken me 10 years to develop all of these techniques to a level where I feel confident applying them to a high skill. And for you guys, you already know the stuff that I didn't know. So you're going to pick this up way faster than me and hopefully absolutely destroy me on the table. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, join the membership, check out our Fireside gaming aids, check out 40K Fireside Masterclass, join the Discord, and of course, we will see you all soon next time by the Fireside. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to the 40K Fireside. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, drop us a comment, check out the YouTube members area, and we look forward to seeing you again next time by the Fireside.